everybody.
Thank you all. Good afternoon. My name is David Ward. I'd like to welcome you all to the National Portrait Gallery for today's program, sponsored by our Education Department and in conjunction with our exhibition, Hide-Seek. Many of you know the animating spirit of Hide-Seek is Walt Whitman. And what you may not know is that Walt Whitman is a continual presence in this building. He was a nurse here during the Civil War. Afterwards, he worked in the Interior Department, from which position he was fired for his authorship of that immoral book, Leaves of Grass. And his presence in the building is made palpable today with our guest. She contains multitudes. She always sings the body electric. Poet, artist, rocker, hard rocker, and now memoirist. Welcome, Patti Smith.
Thank you.
So, a National Book Award, you're getting kind of respectable in your middle age.
I have no problem with that.
So you've adjusted to fame.
Well, I find these things to be wonderful. I have a medal from the French Republic. When I was a teenager, I won Spartan of the Year. And
Wow.
I mean, they aren't what we aspire to when we're doing our work, but, you know, in achieving them, it makes me happy.
No, it should. One of the things that you said during the sense of almost surprise and gratitude when you received the award, and I just wanted to start, because one of the things that's so great about Just Kids is it, particularly for those of us of a certain age, it takes us back to a time that seems impossibly close, yet very distant. And I just want you, because I think you believe in luck, and I just want you to talk about that moment when you arrived at the bus station in South Jersey and didn't have enough for the fare.
Well, it was 1967, and I got laid off in Philadelphia from the factory I was working. There wasn't any work really because the New York shipyard had closed and the Camden, Philly area had no work. So I just decided to come to New York City and get a job. And I had just enough money for a bus ticket. And when I went in to get my ticket, they had raised the fare. And I was devastated. And I went into a phone booth. That was before the Ice Ages. They had phone booth. And to call my sister to try to figure out what to do next. And somebody had left a little white plastic purse in the phone booth, and it had $30 in it, which was a little more than I made in a week at the factory. I think we have enough pictures, right? Thanks. And thanks. I went through the moral dilemma of what to do. There was no identification in the purse. And I just imagined that Providence had given me a hand, and I took the money and went to New York City. But I will say, even though I did that, I have never forgotten my unknown benefactor. Right. I figured it was some girl, and God bless her. I always thank her. I never forget,
as you should,
even though I have no idea what she looked like or anything about her except that she had a white plastic purse.
But it's interesting the way that momentary, fragmentary event connects what I sense, though, as a larger meaning in your work. I mean, you end the foreword to Just Kids with, I live for love, I live for art, and you fold your hands to Providence. And it seemed to me that animating your whole time in New York, or your career for that matter, is this notion of flow, of the notion of as you put it, I'm a sculptor hacking away, not quite sure what I'm doing.
Yeah, like a blind sculptor hacking away. But Well, really, I think some of it is, I love this little book, The Alchemist, and in The Alchemist it says, one of the most wonderful things, it says that the universe conspired to help the shepherd boy because he maintained the language of enthusiasm. And I think that all through life, I've had some really rough times, very hard times, but I don't know, I just feel like that shepherd boy. I'm always optimistic, I'm always looking for the good to happen, and I think that if you keep open like that, you won't be stuck in the mire of your bad luck.
Right.
You'll be more lifted up by your good luck.
Right. I mean, this whole notion of flow experience seems to me to be really interesting in the way that you did it. But I've noted it seems to me, an obvious difference between, I mean, I believe you see yourself as a poet first. Your poetry and the memoirs seem to me to exist on opposite ends of a sort of stylistic scale. And you say at the end of the memoir that you promised that you'd write about Robert, and you fulfilled this promise. Could you just take us through why now, how?
Well, Robert died on March 9th, 1989, and early in the morning, and March 8th, I spoke to him right before he lost consciousness, and we both knew he was dying, and I simply said, what do you want me to do for you? What can I do? I promised him that I would do as I always did, magnify his name, write of him, and he asked me some specific things, but he said, will you tell our story? And I knew what he meant. He meant our story starting from when we were 20, only I could tell it. So I promised I would, but it took me a long time. It took me a long time because I had the death of my husband, my brother, my parents, 2 small children to take care of, and it was only in recent years that I could totally claim this task.
How did you claim it stylistically, though? That's a thing that interests me. That the memoir is such an elegy. It's almost a pastoral. It contrasts, since I just reread all your poems. I mean, your poems are these kind of shards and fragments, and the element again of smoothness in the memoir. I mean, it's almost I have to say, it's almost preternatural.
Well, I wrote a lot in the 80s when I retired from public life. I didn't publish hardly anything, but I was writing continuously, so I was, I had some grasp on writing. But I wrote this book really for two reasons. One, of course, to fulfill my promise, and the other to give Robert to the people, to give him as a holistic human being, and not just as a dying artist.
Right.
And Robert wasn't very much a reader, so I wanted to write a book that I thought he might like to read and that the people would like. I wanted to write a book that had, a certain level of craftsmanship that anyone could appreciate, but also a non-reader would be happy to breeze through. Right. And that was my task. I was writing to the people. When I'm writing poetry, I don't think of anybody. Right. It's more narcissistic. I'm just writing to please myself. But I wrote the book really with the reader in mind, and trying to create almost like a film for the people, like a little movie. Right.
So, I mean, you arrived in Manhattan in '67, that kind of precursor year before the terrible year of 1968. And you talk a little bit briefly about the sort of paranoia that was in the air. But one of the things that, again, and I guess I'm staying with an issue of flow or smoothness, is the way in which, and I'll be blunt, there is so much death in the memoir. I mean, you arrive, and John Coltrane is dead the same month, and it goes through a whole series of public and private deaths. And how did you, and it's a remarkable achievement, the way that you fold those into this narrative seems to me
I think
to be
death
uncanny.
is part. I think part of that is my mother. My mother lost her mother as a child. My father lost his mother early. I never met my grandparents because they all died young. My childhood friend died. There was a lot of death in our family, and I saw how my mother. My mother was obliged to go to the funeral of her father, who died young, and then come home and cook food for us and do laundry and laugh and help us with homework. She always kept things going. She always found, the happy way, the glass being half full and instead of half empty. And I think I learned some of that from her.
Yeah, again, it seems to me that there's this combination in you of this. You want that off?
No, I like seeing. I'm sorry. Just like to. Curious.
So okay, Max's Kansas City. Tell us about Max's Kansas City.
I'm sorry.
Max's Kansas. Well, we're jumping ahead, but the
I interrupted you.
No,
I'm sorry.
it's fine. Feel free.
Well, Max's Kansas City.
The whole scene.
When Robert and I moved to the Chelsea Hotel in 1969, I had been in Paris most of the spring and summer. Robert had explored Manhattan and had met some of the people in the Warhol scene. He had seen Midnight Cowboy. His trajectory was more toward the Warhol scene, and the Warhol scene, at least the second generation, was stationed at the Max's Kansas City. I wasn't really interested in it.
Yeah, you always seem to be standing in the corner.
Yeah, I was just, I just wasn't that interested in it, but it was so important to him. So that's where we went at night. You could hang out with, we all hung out together. Everyone was aspiring to be something, to do something. And in that way, it was great because everyone had a vision that they were moving toward. And so it was it wasn't just a social scene, it was a very creative scene.
Well, yeah, that's again going back to the 67, 68 period, that period of sort of the sense of, weirdly, again, two ideas at the same time of sort of impending doom, but nonetheless incredible creativity, it just seemed to me. I mean, and again, it shoots through the memoir continually. I have to ask you, this is almost a domestic question, but did you and Robert ever quarrel? Because there's actually the thing.
We bickered over the stupidest things. Like he would say things like, Robert took me to my first open mic because he wanted me to read poetry in public, and it was manned by Jim Carroll. And we're getting ready, and I just, as usual, dressed like Baudelaire or something. And Robert came out wearing gold lame pants with a gold lame codpiece that he had designed. And right before that, we just had a coffee. And he had a coffee and I had tea, and I liked honey, and they didn't have honey in the diner, so I would carry it with me. And he'd say, "Patti, don't bring that out. You're drawing attention to yourself." And I just, the things, because he was sort of middle, he had certain middle class, especially when it came to table manners and things, and I was such, an animal, and he would worry about my table manners or my lack of table manners, and he would be decked out in like black see-through net shirts with like 5 different color bandanas and heavy keys, and I'd say, you're worried, that, I'm not using the right spoon, it's just.
There are a couple of moments throughout the book. There are these great moments. I don't know if you can, where Robert he discovers you doing something. Specifically, the time I bring up your checkered past, the first time you smoked dope, and he comes back and there's this continual, "Oh, Patti."
Yeah, he would say, "Patti, no." That's what he would say. "Patti, no." I was like, yeah, he caught me because I never smoked pot. I'm very bronchial, and I wasn't really that interested because the people that would smoke pot, I'm too edgy and too impatient. It would take them 20 minutes to put a coat on. It's just like, I just, so, but like in like 74 or something, I got involved in like Rastafarian music,
Right.
and I saw Harder They Come, so I bought a little pot and I'm trying to stuff it in inside a cigarette, and Robert came in, and I never told him that I was doing this because I was so secretive, and that's when he came in. Patti, no, you're smoking pot. I had twigs sticking out of the wrapper and seeds. I didn't know what I was doing.
How was it? So was it any good?
It was Mexican pot, you know.
see.
It's just it was fun.
You talk of your sign, your blue star, Venus. Why did he call you China?
Well, we just evolved. We had all kinds of little names. He called me Soki because I used to cry a lot. And then he called me China, and I have no idea. That was like, I don't even remember why he started calling me China. Maybe because I had fragile aspects. I have no idea. And I called him Blue because he started making a blue star under his signature. He made the T in the Robert turn into a star. It was just little names.
Right. I want to get back because I'm interested in poetry and your poem. I just wanted to ask you, as a kind of a very precocious reader, and you discovered Rimbaud very early on. And could you talk to us a little bit about Rimbaud? I was also specifically interested in why Rimbaud and not Baudelaire?
Well, I think because, first of all, I discovered Rimbaud first. I discovered Rimbaud through the artist Modigliani. I loved Modigliani when I was in high school, and he loved Rimbaud. And every time I read about him, he was eating hashish and spouting Rimbaud. So I wanted to know who Rimbaud was.
Right.
And then when I discovered Rimbaud, he just happened to look like Bob Dylan. So that was...
That was a killer blow.
But, so I discovered Rimbaud first. And through Rimbaud, I discovered Verlaine, I discovered Baudelaire, of course. And I admire all of the French poets, Nerval, and there's so many of Lafarge. I love all of the French poets of that era. But Baudelaire, I appreciate him as being a precursor. I know that, that he developed the prose poem, and because of him, he helped beget Rimbaud. But I just prefer, truthfully, Rimbaud's language. I think Rimbaud's the better poet. I think that Baudelaire deserves his place as a father of modernism, of important critical analysis of painting, and he's written some beautiful things. But I just truthfully prefer Rimbaud as a writer.
Yeah, it seemed to be that it would get to that element of the relationship between self and style. To Baudelaire, this always seems to be sort of distant. So just to get back, in terms of the task of the poet, seems to me, in many ways, to be the naming things. That, again, back to a personal. When you see Robert and then you lose him and then you find him again in that kind of mysterious, almost Horatio Alger for girls element, where you bump into him and he saves you, and he introduces himself, and you say that, I don't think of you as Bob. Can I call you Rob?
He introduced me as Bob. Well, I had an Uncle Bob who was a beautiful man, but he was a very big, portly, sort of awkward guy, and Robert was, so lithe and slim, and it just. I couldn't bring myself to call him Bob, so I said, "Can I call you Robert?" And he said, "Okay." And actually, he became Robert ever after.
I also have to ask you, were you the one who named Janis Joplin Pearl?
No.
Okay. Because there's that moment on the stairs where you say
no, I just assumed. In fact, I elaborated on that a little in the paperback because people asked me that. I didn't mean to. I just figured everyone assumed that they knew that was her nickname, but I was just, I was being clever, No, you're Pearl, a pearl of a girl, because Pearl was her nickname.
Thanks for clearing that up. There is, enough with the French poets. Let's go back to America. There's the moment when you arrive in New York. When Coltrane dies, and I was struck, I was looking at the book again last night, and in the next paragraph you talk about being in Frank O'Hara territory. And I couldn't help wonder the correlate Coltrane dying and Frank O'Hara. Did you have in mind then O'Hara's poem, The Day Lady Died?
Yes, when I thought of The Day Lady Died when I looked at the five spot, because she sang
Right.
there. But really, I was thinking of lunch poems.
Right.
And I have to say, sidetracking a little, I went up and looked at the exhibit. It's so beautiful. Oh my God, it's just such a bold and beautiful exhibit. And seeing that painting that Larry Rivers, I knew Larry Rivers, and I haven't seen that painting in a long time, and that beautiful, it was his masterpiece, that painting of Frank O'Hara. And of course, the photograph you have of Walt Whitman, I've never seen it.
Yeah, the Aikens that we got a couple of years ago.
I'm a Philly girl, and Aikens looms large, and something that you learn, a painter that you learn about, that you study, that you see in the Philadelphia Museum. But I never even knew he took photographs like that.
No, they're
beautiful.
fantastic. So what about Whitman?
What about him?
No, no. I'm asking
Walt
the
Whitman,
questions.
Walt Whitman, I'm from the Camden area, and Walt Whitman is buried there. He designed his own headstone. It's really like a little mausoleum in this sort of beautiful, sprawling cemetery in Camden, New Jersey. And I love Walt Whitman. He, he's really, to me, I think of like sort of it's almost like a spiritual link between William Blake, Walt Whitman, and Allen Ginsberg.
Right.
They all seem, the way you use the word, they're in flux, in flow with one another, and all containing multitudes, all believing in the animating of the human spirit into work, and all thinking of generations before them, all very generous men. And I love the story of, it's so funny, I didn't realize that there was such a controversy over Leaves of Grass, because there's a great story of how a journalist came to see President Lincoln, and he had Whitman's, like a galley, I guess a galley of Whitman's poems, and President Lincoln said, could I see that? And he says, I'll be right back. And he goes in another room and he starts reading, and then no one could bother him. And then the journalist wanted his book back, and Lincoln didn't want to give it back. So.
Now, Whitman had this odd stalkerish relationship with Lincoln where he kind of trailed him around, but they actually never met, even though
I know, it's so sad, because I know they would have loved to, really. I think they would have loved to meet.
I actually have always, just as a slight advertise, I did our show on Whitman, and I always thought that Whitman didn't want to meet Lincoln because he was, in some senses, afraid of him. That there was too much.
No, I can understand that.
Too much dailiness.
But I think Lincoln would have adored the opportunity to talk to Whitman about his work.
Right.
I think that's what he would have wanted, to go through poems and ask him about things, because he was a serious reader of poetry. There
is some notion that Billy Herndon, who Lincoln's law partner, who was a first edition collector, had the Whitman Leaves of Grass and read it in the law offices back in Illinois, and that Lincoln would have heard him as early as that. But they again, in terms of this sort of aura, this connection between them, it was, as you say, indissoluble.
It's almost like you imagine them black and white. Yeah. Because Whitman always sit with his white beard and his white hat and his white suits, and Lincoln always in black, and his, his image of, this.
Right.
This,
and so, and Lincoln is totally reticent, and Whitman is so voluble. And I think that Whitman, in some senses, felt if they were ever in the same room together, it would be the space-time continuum would blow up and it would like fracture everybody else. Since you mentioned the show, and since Georgia O'Keeffe is in the show, would you mind reading your poem on Georgia O'Keeffe?
Oh, okay. I wrote this many, many years ago, probably around 1970.
It comes with a picture that we were unable to borrow.
But I wrote this in 1971, I believe, and she was still alive. And what drew me to write it is a friend of mine, John McKendry, who was the curator of the Met at the time, had gone to visit her, and I said, well, what does she do now? And he said, well, for one thing, she's always, got a stick and, killing snakes that are on the property.
Who wouldn't?
George O'Keeffe, great lady painter, what she do now? She goes out with a stick and kills snakes. George O'Keeffe, all life still, cow skull, bull skull, no bullshit, pyrite, she's no fool, she started out pretty girl. George O'Keeffe, until she had her fill, painted desert flower cactus, hawk and head mule, coral watercolor, red coral reef, been around forever, George O'Keeffe. Great lady painter, what she do now? Go and beat the desert, stirred dust bowl. Go and beat the desert, snake skin skull. Go and beat the desert, all life still.
Thank you. You have another poem, it's longer and grimmer, where you talk about Jackson Pollock's death as a work of art. And to be honest, I have trouble with that. Could you
well, that's a difficult poem. What that is
yes.
actually, it's not so much about Jackson Pollock. It's really a meditation on Robert Bresson's movie Balthazar, and it's sort of it's difficult to break down, but
yes.
in a part of it, it talks about Jackson Pollock. It says, from his mad wrists spin us. We're all children of Jackson Pollock. We're all children of like the fusion of mind and motion of Jackson Pollock. But it talks about, I think you're talking about
yes.
talks about, it says that he is, artist and murderer.
Yes.
Well, yes, I wrote that as a young girl. I love Jackson Pollock, but that I stepped away and looked at what he did at the end of his life. He, and I got it from a Frank O'Hara poem. First Bunny died, and then Jackson. Jackson, I think, who always said there are no accidents, just brazenly went out, took his life, but he took a young girl down with him.
Yeah.
So in that way, he is a murderer. He created and the debris of that, I was imagining it as like Pollock's last work, the blood of this girl, and his own being, the drips from their blood being Pollock's last work. It wasn't written with any judgment or anything. It was just a meditation.
Yeah, you may even be right.
Well, it doesn't even matter who's right or wrong.
No.
I don't have any judgment of it. It was just a vision.
But again, in this, what I sense is this sort of duality of your career. I'm thinking, because it's frankly been on my mind a bit, the hide-seek show, that on the one hand Pollock, on the other hand Jasper Johns for you. There's the element of quiet, the picture that we have in the show ventriloquism, with the sense of creating speaking with your own voice, developing your own voice in a way which is the post-abstract expressionist sense of...
Well, I mean, I don't know exactly really where we're going with this question, except if I try to glean something out of it. For myself, I've always had an irreverent streak, and that's got me in trouble a lot, and it will always get me in trouble. But on the other hand, I also have a classical streak.
Right.
The other part of me, what do I listen to at night? I listen to Glenn Gould. What do I like to go to? I like to go to the opera. How do I feel about the museum right now? I think that the museum did a beautiful and elegant and bold exhibit, and I think that's my main concern. I can't be pinned down to and be expected to think I'm going to be all that way.
Right.
relate to everything that happens as if I was a 22 punk rocker. You know, I'm myself, you know. I can be just as obnoxious as I was when I was 20, and I can also be, you know, hopefully a compassionate human being, but I'm not all one or the other, because, as Walt Whitman said, we contain multitudes.
Where do, I mean, you had said again with the NBA, you know, to never forget the book. Where do you see the humanities and the arts going? Where do you, I mean?
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, I'm not, who will decide that is the new generation.
Right.
I'm not a, you know, a sociological visionary. You know, perhaps when I was younger, at this point, it's going in places that I probably couldn't even imagine. You know, I can't keep up with the, you know, the technology, the lack of privacy, you know, the blurring of every single line, the cult of celebrity. I can't keep up with all of that. All I can do is just do my work, have faith in new generations that they'll, you know, navigate through all the crap that is being issued, or, you know, this obsession with notoriety, and that they'll do good work.
Right. Will you play for us?
Yeah, I can do a song. Is it time already?
What? Yeah. You're over here.
I'll just sit there. I mean,
Okay,
I'm not much of it. You can just sit there. I'll just. I don't really have the proper technology, but that's okay. This little song is a song I wrote when I was feeling unappreciated. It was before I won the National Book Award. And but at the same time as I was feeling a little down, you know, my mind was already computing all the, you know, ways in which I'm lucky. And one is this thing, I like the way you talk about it, this flow. I have had, you know, I've had the desire to work, to produce, to write, to think, to explore since I was a very young child. And that's its own reward. So I thought about William Blake and how this man, with all his gifts and everything he gave to us, was also a victim of the Industrial Revolution. Here he was, such a beautiful engraver, hand colorer, doing these beautiful books one by one, songs of innocence and songs of experience, and on, at a time when the printing press is invented and they can do thousands, and he becomes obsolete almost overnight. So William Blake, the poet, the painter, the activist, the engraver, was nearly forgotten in his lifetime, had very little success, and died poverty-stricken. But he maintained his vision. He did his work, and he did it with a certain amount of joy to his last breath. So I think he's a very good example. In my Blakean year, I was so disposed toward a mission yet unclear, advancing pole by pole, Virgin breathed into my ear, obey this simple code. One road is paved in gold, one road is just a road. In my Blakean year, such a woeful schism. The pain in our existence was not as I envisioned. Boots that tramp from track to track, worn down to the soul. When road was paved in gold, when road was just a road. Am I blinking? Yeah. Temptation, yet a hiss. Just a shallow spear, robed with cowardice. Brace yourself for bitter flack, for a life divine, a labyrinth of riches never shall unwind. The tears that bind the pilgrim sack are stitched into the Blakean back. So throw off your stupid cloak, embrace all that you fear, 'cause joy will conquer all despair in my Blakean year. So throw off your stupid cloak, embrace all that you fear, 'cause joy will conquer all despair in my Blakean year. In my Blakean year. In my Blakean year.
And I think we'll close on that lovely note. We have time for questions. We don't have mics, so if you don't mind me repeating the question. Also, please try to put your question in the form of a question. And I think we need the house lights because I can't see any hands. Or maybe there are no questions.
Anybody have a question?
Come on. Yeah, well, you pick them, Patty.
Okay, right there.
I really like the stories.
Could you stand up, sir?
I really like the stories you had about the Chelsea Hotel, and I really like the stories you had about Harry Smith, who was a great folklorist, and one should know about. But I wonder if you could tell a little bit about what Harry Smith taught you about folklorists, not about how he was always cadging money, but sort of, you know, the art that he helped us learn about.
Well, Harry had such a diverse field of knowledge, and really, in all the time I spent with Harry, we talked mostly about alchemy and magic, and except sometimes he would play tapes for me that he had made that no one had heard yet. I mentioned he played me a little tape of a song done by a girl who said she had been Jesse James' girlfriend, and he had Kiowa India rituals, but we just listened to them. You know, I don't, you know, I experienced with Harry and had adventures with Harry, but I wasn't like a student or anything, so I couldn't really. Someone else could talk to you about all of more musicology and things like that. Who spent, because Harry. Everybody has different stories. Some people can say, I learned everything about the blues from Harry, or I learned everything about string figures from Harry. And me and Harry spent a lot of time on magic. Oh, he just wanted to know what I learned from Harry Smith.
Sorry, my bad. That was my job.
But okay.
Yes, I know, fell down.
Yes? Yes.
Yes.
of all, I'm so happy that you have received the honor that.
Oh, thank you.
You know, like many people in this room, we've been in love with you since the 70s and we respect all of your work.
Thank you.
Now, having a 22-year-old artist daughter, I'm wondering if you have any ideas or, you know, what artists can do today, because it's a whole different world in the art scene. You know, they can't go to New York. Or
Sure they
it's
can.
very expensive, and so.
Well,
Just to repeat the question, this is a follow-on from my last question to Patti, which was what the arts today and how you can make your way in them. Although the little white purse probably has to have about $300 in it.
Well, I mean, don't forget, I went to New York City looking for a job, not just, you know, to fulfill my dreams as an artist. I went there because there was employment at the time. But really, I would tell anyone that, especially a young person, what they should be interested in is the evolution of their work. You know, it doesn't matter where they're working. You don't have to be in New York City. You can be in Detroit, Philadelphia, Newark. You can be here. You know, you can go to Europe. It doesn't matter where you are, unless you're trying to build a scene, and maybe that would be more important. But the real important thing is just to focus on work. I talk to people all the time, and they seem so, you know, should I get a manager? Should I get an agent? Where can I go to get a gallery? And, you know, first of all, it's your motivation, what you want to do, what you want to give people, what you have to say, how you can develop your skills. And, I mean, I'm 63 years old, and I'm still learning. You know, there's a lot of, it's work, hard work. And the first thing the last thing one should be worrying about is how they're going to get famous, how they're going to get a record deal, how they're going to get in a gallery. The first thing is just developing your work into something worthy.
What are you working on now?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm making a record, writing, and taking photographs, drawing. I'm always working, always doing something.
In the middle.
No other song captures the supernatural ecstasy of the feeling of being in love, like the song Dancing Barefoot.
Oh, thank you.
I've been entranced with that song all of my adult life.
Thank you.
Just describe for me.
What do you want to play it?
Can you?
Well, he has asked about my song Dancing Barefoot. It's very interesting that you should ask about that, because I'm writing a major piece that is, that song is inspiring a very big piece. But to bring it down quickly, Dancing Barefoot I wrote in response to, it has 3 levels. One is to the people, because I wrote it, part of it to the people. And it's about communication with the people as a performer. Another level is communication with God, my creator. And another level, probably the most prominent thing is, it was a love song to my late husband, Fred Sonic Smith. And so when it says, could it be he's taken over me, that's about him.
Yes.
I would just like to thank you for having such an impact on me and a lot of people at my school. And I'm in a club that promotes student action. And I was wondering what your feelings were about the controversial decision with the exhibit upstairs.
I think that it's
Yeah, just-
overblown. It's okay.
No, I just was going to repeat it for the.
Well, she wants to, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Just
You
the,
can do it. I'm sorry.
the removal of the Wanarovich video.
Well, I think probably it brought more attention to the video than it probably would have gotten in the first place. So I think that
That wasn't our intention.
I think it's more humorous than anything. I don't think that it's, I read somewhere where someone compared it to what happened with the Robert Mapplethorpe exhibit in Cincinnati.
Right.
There's no comparing the two issues. They shut down Robert's exhibit. They slandered him as a human being. They called him a pedophile. And he wasn't alive, of course, to defend himself. I think that really it's like a snafu that we're in the middle of. It's almost, it's almost like this overreaction of religions toward any examination of what they think is proper. And it's really ridiculous because most art, from Buñuel to Mexican retablos, are much more shocking than this stupid little plastic crucifix with ants crawling on it. I imagine, I know I'm going off the track, but I've thought about this. I was imagining Jesus coming back and looking at this and embracing the ants and being appalled by the crucifix. And I have to say, we can't forget the Smithsonian is it receives federal funding. If the Smithsonian lost their funding, hundreds and hundreds of people, I believe, would be out of work. We would lose such an important institution. I think, whether it's all sort of dumb, the Smithsonian has done a beautiful job. This exhibition is so strong, is so beautiful, is so diverse and so elegant. I was just nearly moved to tears by it, and I don't think that it should be clouded by this one issue that is unfortunate. And really...
Let me just say a heartfelt thank you.
Well, I'm grateful for the exhibition. I think I also think it's interesting, 10 years ago or more or less, there would be a public outcry because of all the male schmoozing in the pictures, or whatever. But there was nothing of that. What are people worried about? Ants on a crucifix? I think that it shows some progress in our country.
Evolution of religious views and what God means to Patti Smith.
Well, let's
do
sum
evolution.
that up in 2 minutes.
Now we've got 10.
Well, I couldn't really express what God means to me in such a short period of time, since it's part of my whole being. But I received the idea of God first from my mother and prayer. And then religion came. I went to Bible school. I was a Jehovah's Witness till I was 12. I studied various faiths. I've looked into all faiths. I've been to all kinds of churches. I loved going in a church and sitting. Well, I have chosen not to have a religion. I've chosen to go back to the original moment where my mother gave me God in telling me of God and gave me prayer. And that's all I need. I do like to go into churches, especially when I'm on the road. Churches are so beautiful, if I'm certain Christ would agree, a bit material. But I find them beautiful. Some of our greatest art has been committed for the church. So I like to go in churches and light a candle or a temple or a mosque, but it's more aesthetic, really. And I don't need any specific religion to have a relationship with God and to pray. That's part of my daily routine.
There's somebody way in the back.
Can you tell us the inspiration for your poem, Radio Baghdad?
Yes. He's asking about the Radio Baghdad, which was on our record Tramping. Of course, I was, like many of you, protested against the Bush administration going into Iraq, and I was just devastated when we went into Iraq. And I wanted to respond to it, not only as a human being, but as an artist. But I decided the way to do it would not be from a political viewpoint, but a more humanistic viewpoint. So I went in the recording studio with my band. I had no specific lyrics. We had a riff. My guitarist, Oliver Ray, had written a guitar riff, and I said, just improvise and trust me and follow me. And I imagined being a mother in Baghdad, trying to sing her children to sleep as the Americans were bombing. I tried to imagine being a mother myself, what that would have felt like, trying to, wanting her children to feel safe, but at the same time when bombs were falling. So it's really from the point of view of a mother. And that's where the impulse came to improvise it.
Yes.
As you've written about Robert Mapplethorpe, I'm wondering if you feel that your story has been told through your work, or do you feel there's someone out there who will write your story in the way you've written his?
I was going to ask and actually close proceedings by asking, are you going to write about yourself?
Well, I love to, I am writing another book already. Once I finished that book, I couldn't stop writing. I just kept going. And because my mind, I so disciplined myself to write and think about, all of these times. I have a certain time period that I would like to write about from a different point of view. Just Kids was completely filtered as much as I could. It was filtered through Robert and I, because that was my task. But I would like to write a book, even sort of in the same time period, from my own point of view.
Yes.
That really is, my thoughts in being a girl, my thoughts in being a young artist, my thoughts in writing the songs that I wrote. But I like writing about when I was younger, especially childhood. It's I don't think that I'll write a whole lot after a certain period, because it's just too close to me. But I can't imagine really that anybody could write my story past a certain age, except maybe my daughter, who knows me best.
Well, we'll have her when she does that. Again, Patti Smith, thank you. It's been a pleasure. That was great.